Well, welcome once again to Meteorology Lab. I think we're up and running pretty good tonight. We had kind of a frustrating time on Thursday with the network, but I think that's solved. I'm not seeing any frame drops, and our signal looks good. So I think we're about ready to head into some of the weather, and you can see things are kind of stratified, kind of unusual. Haven't seen anything like this from the drone this summer yet. And that's because we've had a frontal passage, one of our first ones of the fall. Anyway, things are getting kind of active out in the Atlantic. We are up to September 9th, and that is the peak of sea surface temperatures in this hemisphere. And it's also coincidentally the peak of hurricane season. And we're seeing these storms rapidly coming together out in the Atlantic. The big one that we're concerned about is Florence. It hit hurricane status, I think today, Category 1. So this is not a particularly strong storm, but this is what we have a lot of concern about. The models are converging on a track right into North Carolina, and the ECMWF has followed suit with that, and I found that the GFS has been handling both the Pacific and Atlantic systems a little bit better than the European model. So the European model has fallen in line with this, and they're carrying a very similar track, and we'll show that to you in a little bit here. Anyway, looking at a major hurricane, probably Category 2 or 3 at the minimum, coming on shore, and there's a couple of other very significant hazards associated with that, which I'll be showing you shortly. Also, let's see. Let's go through these, shall we? We've got Tropical Storm Isaac. That's another one that I have a little bit of concern about. The track on that is pretty far south. That's coming into the Caribbean over the southern Leeward Islands, just south of Dominica there. And this is a track that we saw, I think, with Ivan, maybe, back in, I think that was 2005. I don't know, I'm probably a little bit hazy, but I think, yeah, it was that storm that took a rather southern track and then curved up northward. So anyway, what happens out in the Caribbean, that's still at least a week off. So we're just going to cross that bridge when we get to it, because the influences on the steering of these storms are very subtle, and that could take things, 10, 20 degrees to the left or to the right, and over 1 to 2 weeks, that could be a pretty significant error, so we're not going to worry about that until a little bit later. We've also got Helene, or if you want to go with a French pronunciation, that would be Ellen, I think. Anyway, that's Category 1 also, a little bit weaker than Florence, and it looks like we don't have to worry about this one so much, because that's expected to recurve pretty quickly up to the north. Also, things are kind of active out in the Pacific Basin. Well, we've got Paul out there, but if we go a little bit further, we've got Olivia, which we've been watching for a while. This is a Category 1 storm. It is on the way down, and so we're expecting that to come into Hawaii, but very likely is a tropical storm there. So the risk with this will be mostly rain, flooding, maybe some scattered wind damage here and there, and you can see that'll move very quickly and very decisively through the Hawaiian Islands. Let me just check real quick in chat and make sure things are looking okay with the microphone and video. Okay, very good. Yeah, let me just go through this real quick. JT checking in there. Erica Baker in Southeast Kansas. Nice cool 67 over 60. David Lumbert in Little Rock, 72 over 67. Yeah, we're all enjoying this cool weather. Brian Lowe there in Delmarva. Sue M, 6 inches since Friday. Got Burl H and Fun with Tech, Shirley Keast, 63 in the UP of Michigan. Ryan Toomey is down there in Florida, anxiously awaiting tropical developments. Mark in New Hampshire, 57. Yeah, Ryan Toomey says we're going nuclear in the Atlantic Basin. Harrison Rademacher, Grand Forks, welcome to the webcast. Alexander Nasinski, hello, and Michael O. Yes, it definitely has been a while. All right, let's move on and see what's going on. One thing that I like to look at when we're looking at all these systems, let me go back to the overview map. We're going to focus mostly on the Atlantic storms. So there they are, and I think what we'll do is we'll work from left to right. So Florence, that's already a hurricane, and I like to use this University of Wisconsin Dvorak site. They've got a real-time Dvorak technique, which kind of gives you very quick breaking automated intensity calculations on these storms, and that uses mostly the cloud top signature on infrared imagery. So some of the values that we look at are the estimated pressure, the CI number, the T value. 3 to 4, that's getting up into the lower range of hurricanes, and they usually top out at about 6 to 7. And let me just show you the actual automated images. This is, let me make sure I've got this all correct here. 60, 40, and 10. Okay, that's good. All right, so yeah, there's Florence there. And you can see that there's not a whole lot of symmetry in this system. There's a couple of large cloud bands, no sign of an eye in the center. So this is kind of on the weak side, and you can see that black, it's only showing a little smudge there on the northeast side. Now, what we're looking for with a strongly developed system, and I put this together about 30 minutes ago, I'm going to show you Irma from last year on this same type of Dvorak processor here. And I'm going to run an animation, and hopefully this doesn't drag our frame rate down and start the buffering. If it does, I'll stop that and we'll go back. But anyway, get ready. Here it goes. This is Irma. And this is a window that's following Irma. This is way out in the Atlantic, east of the Leeward Islands. And you can see that initially you can barely see an eye in there. And the banding is very important. You can see the black and whites start to appear, the circular black and white. And they're not quite totally symmetric. They're kind of, you know, popping up here and there around the eye. And then as we get a little bit later in the sequence, you can see it does start developing kind of a symmetric appearance. And there it is coming up on the Leeward Islands. And you can see it's the black is really starting to take on a circular shape, and the same thing with the white, and then we start getting the inner grays. So this is where it's picking up to category, I want to say maybe 4 storm, passing Puerto Rico there. And this is what we're looking at with a much more well-developed system. And you can see it's kind of like night and day comparing Florence to this. And we may see a little bit of this with Florence later. But for now, it's definitely a weaker storm. And this is about where the image sequence ends. I don't have the rest of it going up into Florida. So let's go back and look at the current system. So, yeah, pretty weak there. No sign of an eye like we saw in the other image. Let's go over to Isaac. Kind of a similar picture there. The darker or the colder shades are pretty much right in the center of the storm. And this is Helene. So this is way out there off the Cape Verde area. And we're mostly just showing this outer cloud band right here, and almost an open eye right there. And the blacker shades only take up a very small portion of that storm. So this is definitely in the lower fringes of hurricane development. And this is a chart you can find on the internet if you put in Dvorak intensity technique. With your tropical storms are going to be down in this range right here. And you can see those open patterns. And I think Helene is maybe in this, kind of in that tier right there. So you see right there kind of the curved bands. And then as we get into the T4s and T5s, we pick up the more symmetric appearance. And then with the stronger storms, it's distinctly circular there. So those are some of the patterns that we might see going from weakest to strongest. Sea surface temperatures are definitely up. We only need about 27 Celsius to get tropical storm development going. The 27 line is way up here. So we can certainly support tropical storms all the way up to the Carolinas and offshore. And you can see the Gulf Stream current right there off the coast. And there's a kind of a concern as Florence approaches that. It's going to get into these warmer waters, and that'll help it pick up intensity there. And in terms of anomaly, which is the departure from normal, there's what it looks like right there. So things are a little bit cool off the North African coast there. And then as you get into the Western Atlantic, things are above normal. Also, the Gulf is pretty much neutral to slightly above normal. And then everything from Mexico out to Hawaii, which is just off the frame right there, it is definitely above normal. So that's helping to support kind of an active East Pacific hurricane season out there this year. Second hurricane to be approaching Hawaii this year. Okay, we'll get back into the tracks a little bit later, so let's keep things moving, and let's check out things region by region across the U.S. Here's what things look like this evening. And one thing that's kind of unusual on this visible image is the appearance of stratified cloud forms right in here. So let me finish drawing that right there. So this is typically what we don't see in the summer. This is all flat clouds in the cold air advection zone behind the front. Probably a little bit of an inversion aloft helping to cause those to stratify. And we'll zoom in a little bit on those as we go into the regional sectors. Pacific Northwest looking like this. Looks like kind of a weak system coming onshore there in the Seattle area, but overall looks pretty good across much of the Great Basin and Northern Rockies. In the southwestern U.S., monsoon season is still going, and you can see it looks like the bulk of it has shifted up into Albuquerque, Four Corners, but even at the Sour, not much vertical development. Most of the showers that we have are just out there around Albuquerque and Klein's Corner, Santa Fe, and very little in the eastern Rockies there. We do have some storms up in the Dakotas. There they are right there, putting out some anvils southeast of Bismarck. Looks like another frontal system moving through that part of the country. Further to the south, this is kind of under the influence of a Great Lakes polar air mass. It's bringing some cool air kind of from northeast to southwest like that. So that's helping to create some fair skies across much of the Midwest and Arkansas, Texas, Kansas area. And down in that region, this kind of shows us some of that stratus and stratocumulus, and that's what we saw on that aerial footage earlier during the opening. It's some of this right here. Some of it's breaking out into a little bit of blue sky. But yeah, this is all like 2,000 to 2,500 foot overcast. And then the more typical convective weather is further south. This is all thunderstorm debris, and let me see if I can animate that. Yeah, there you can see the motion coming from the north, the low-level winds bringing those clouds in from Missouri and Kansas southward. And then down to the south, we've got the southwesterly flow helping to kind of push the anvil debris downstream from a lot of these cumulus tops. Okay, let's see. Let's check out the northeast U.S. Looks like we got a pretty well-developed frontal system down in Kentucky, Tennessee. And let me just show you exactly where that is. I'm going to freeze frame that for mid-afternoon. Yeah, losing the daylight, this is becoming a problem. Getting a lot of dark frames on here as the days grow shorter. So anyway, I don't know if you've noticed this, but there's kind of two distinct cloud regime, two areas of cloud motion. There's one right here. This is all the stratus stuff. That's heading to the southwest. And then the other stuff is heading to the northeast. What's happening is that this stuff is in the mid and upper levels of the atmosphere, and this is in the lower levels. And so what we want to focus on is the mid and upper level stuff out here. So let's take a look at that. If you look at the shape of this, that kind of outlines a typical baroclinic system. If you've read through textbooks and looked at that kind of an elongated shape, kind of like that, you probably recognize that from a lot of systems if you've been following them. That's the signature of our frontal system. And typically we find the surface low in this area here, with a cold front extending southward, kind of in that region. And then where we have this large, bulky, white overcast, that's typically north of a warm front, and that would be located maybe here or maybe like that right there. So without going to the surface chart, we've got an idea where to find the fronts. They're going to be right in that region. Then we have the southeast U.S. thunderstorms along that front, all the way from Nashville, looks like Huntsville, all the way down to Jackson and central Louisiana. Out ahead of it, some tropical air. Not much vertical development in that stuff. It's got kind of a dry, kind of a dry look there. Not very vertical. We do have the sea breeze coming on shore right there, and that's where a lot of the storms are happening, but overall pretty quiet out in this region right here. Okay, so the surface map, it's looking like that right there. And so our front is in the ballpark. There's a little bit of cold air damming in Virginia right there, and that's where the warm front gets kind of stuck out in the Piedmont region and around the Blue Ridge Mountains, kind of like that. And that's due to stubborn cold air sitting out in this region right there. So it's kind of hard to displace that because it's got nowhere to go. It's kind of trapped by the mountains in this region right there. So it sits there, and the front doesn't move very far northward through that region compared to Kentucky and Ohio. So we get this kind of S-shaped look, and that's very common in the cool season. So we'll be seeing a lot of that. All right, we've also got the front coming in through Louisiana and Mississippi. Things have cooled down in Texas and Arkansas. And one thing that I look for in this region right here is not the front itself, but what's back behind the front. And that's that high pressure area. This is what's actually influencing the weather in this region. So this is a large cold air mass covering the Great Lakes area. And cold air is wrapping around the west side of that frontal system as it pushes off into the Appalachian region. And then up in the north-central U.S., there's frontal system number 2 going through the Dakotas. You can see that the moisture is very weak. See in here, I've got the moisture as a kind of a green shade on the map, and it doesn't even show green. It's kind of a brown color, and that's because the dew points are very low. They're down in the 40s and 50s in this area. And that's because we haven't had much return moisture coming up from the Gulf to feed that area. So very likely any storms in this area are going to be high-based, because all that moisture that they do have, it's all recirculated from the Midwest. The better moisture is down along the Gulf Coast right there. And we can bring up the plots and actually look at that moisture. And a few areas up to 61, 63. Probably a little bit of evapotranspiration, but a lot of our mid-60s and 70s are well down to the south there. Okay, quick look at the mesoscale conditions in Tennessee and Alabama, where they've got that frontal system approaching. Dew points in the low to mid-70s across much of that region. And there's that feed of tropical air coming up from the southwest. And then a little outflow boundary. Let me see if I can draw that a little bit better. Yeah, there it is right there. So that's probably the leading edge of some of that convection out ahead of the cold front. And it's very cool in Texas, Oklahoma, wow, that's impressive. 74 there in DFW, 74 Oklahoma City, and 73 in Little Rock. Yeah, very impressive there. Okay. Stream is still looking good. 0 dropped frames, so whatever we're doing is definitely working there. Okay, convective weather-wise, it is pretty quiet today. SPC only showing a general area of thunderstorms all up and down through this. A lot of thunderstorms, but there's only one very small marginal risk area for Virginia. So the instability and shear is likely kind of limited today. No watches in effect, and storm reports, looks like only a couple here and there. Looks like one little red dot there around Norfolk. I guess maybe they had a, I don't know, maybe I'll track that down, see what happened. One little tornado, okay, Ocean City, 1415Z, that's going to be about 10 in the morning. Possible tornadic damage from waterspout pushing on shore at Willoughby Spit. So, anyway, I don't know if anybody saw that, but yeah, there it is. It's going to be right in that area. But again, that was about 9 or 10 hours ago. All right, let's look at the thickness and isobars. We are transitioning to the cold season. This very large high is definitely evidence of that. Let me get my cursor back. Hang on a second. Yeah, there we go. So this is that big polar high. It's kind of on its way out. It's centered over Quebec and the Maritimes. So that's heading out to sea right there, but leaving in its wake a lot of cool air, and like we've said, that has pushed all the way down into Texas and Arkansas. So this has really been a lot of, it's been very pleasant for us, to say the least. Been able to leave our AC off. And there's the next system coming southward. So there's where that is located. And what's driving this frontal system is this high over northern Alberta. And up to the north, looks like more cold air. The Hudson Bay vortex is really coming together quickly. There's the cold air centered over, I guess that'd be around Resolute and Pelly Bay, up in that area. And we'll take a look at that polar vortex on the upper air GFS. That'll be coming up shortly. And then precipitable water looking like this. We've seen a lot of drying across Texas, Arkansas, Missouri, and Kansas as that front has pushed southward. So that's replaced a lot of that moisture that we've had with drier air, so things are looking a little bit drier across much of the Central Plains. Okay, let's see what's up next. I guess we'll take a look at a couple of skew-ts. That's kind of a popular thing. A lot of people request that. So let me bring up the evening soundings. Already up to the 10th. Okay, so the Fort Worth sounding is looking like this right here. Strong inversion based at about 5,000, extending up to about 7,000, and that's where we're getting a lot of those cloud layers forming. What's happening is we've got a lot of residual moisture, a little bit of strong heating where we do have breaks in the overcast here and there. The temperatures are up near 80, so yeah, we do get some very shallow parcels rising up, and then they hit that inversion and they spread out. So very little happening above that. In fact, the air up there is pretty dry. A little bit of cirrus indicated right in that region. Let's bring up a couple more skew-ts. Let's see. Yeah, down where there's all this cloud material, we'll pull up a skew-t from that area, maybe Corpus Christi. And that definitely looks a lot more tropical. High relative humidities up and down through the column. we'll go up north to Norman, Oklahoma, and there we should see fair weather. Temperatures in the mid-70s in that area. Very similar to Fort Worth. There's a version right in that area, and then a lot of dry air above that. And I guess we'll take it up to Aberdeen, where we've got those high-based storms. And there is a little bit of a cap in that area. So there's the lifted parcel right there. There's some tall skinny cape through that area. That's the cap right there. And you notice that cap there is definitely very strong, and very likely there's some areas in the Dakotas that have better moisture than what we see on this sounding here. In fact, you can see the dew points. They're only around 59, 58, 59, but there were a couple spots up in that area that had 61-degree dew points. Yeah, in fact, I even see one little 63 up there around Bismarck. So, yeah, if we modify the sounding based on that, the moisture profile will look like that. And then when we actually lift that, we get a parcel trace that's further over to the right a little bit, and that could be just what we need to clear that cap. Okay, so yeah, the moisture, I guess, is not really too bad. Maybe I was a little bit presumptuous calling it high-based. Yeah, there's 63 dew points. That's not too bad there. And let's see, 20-knot winds out of the south. Weak mid-level wind profile, so that's going to kind of reduce some of the severe weather risk. That'll kind of flatten out some of the curvature of the photograph. And then aloft, only 40 knots, so storms aren't going to be very well sheared up in that area. And I think that pretty much does it. We'll head into the forecast now. And let me take a quick look at chat. See how things are looking in there. And I'll just have to skim this real quick. Let's see here. Find my place. Let's see, Fred Reamer there. I got Carl Burkhoff, and Fred Reamer says it's a weather hole there. Deflector shields are up. Ryan Toomey's mentioning the Gulf Stream current adds another step up category to hurricanes. That's a pretty good rule of thumb. Let's see, 39 watching. Bear Clinic leaf, yeah, that system we saw, it's kind of a slight, yeah, it's definitely a bit of a Bear Clinic leaf there. It's probably developed a little bit since it's picked up that S shape. 2 points in the 60s in North Dakota. Michael O here in the Locusts. Winter forecast, no, I've not done that yet. I thought about adding that in, but I was too busy looking at those hurricanes. Megan John reporting 68 in Minnesota. Ryan reporting Hurricane Hunter aircraft staging in Bermuda tonight for tomorrow morning intercept of Florence. And yeah, that'll be very important there. All right, so yeah, let's start out with Texas tonight. Pretty much a front on its way out that'll be carrying a lot of the storms with us, with that front. And then the model going for a little bit of maybe elevated storms out in the Longview, Shreveport area around dawn. Okay, let's switch to the upper levels, and this actually shows us a little bit of the hurricanes because the hurricanes are vertically stacked. See, there's Florence right there. And let's see, out in the, yeah, there's Olivia heading up on Hawaii, so we'll put that into motion. Go forward about a day or two. So starting out, we've got pretty zonal pattern. Strong flow coming into the Oregon coast right there, across to the Great Lakes and out towards Newfoundland. And up to the north, you see that polar vortex right there, Hudson Bay vortex, very well developed for this time of year. It looks like that's centered right there, just west of Baffin Island. And that will get a little bit stronger over the next week or so. Also, out in the North Pacific, hang on, yeah, there we go. yeah, there's a little bit of a blocking pattern. See that right there? This is a mega block. Got a low right there, south of the Aleutian Islands, a low off of Washington, and the flow around those systems goes up like this, around this high, and then back like that. And the flow of that jet stream, it kind of resembles the Greek letter omega, which looks like that. And when we see this on a chart, that tells us that the upper level patterns are not really moving very much, and they're very resistant to changing. So very likely we're going to see this pattern kind of stuck there for a few days. Out in Hawaii, you can see Olivia heading into the Hawaiian Islands right there. GFS taking it more towards the Big Island. And then here's Florence coming on, heading into the North Carolina coast, coming on shore somewhere between Wilmington and Cape Hatteras there. Also, the pattern gets very meridional. Once we start getting rid of that block right there, you see how wavy it gets right there. Hudson Bay vortex centered up in this area right there. And this could be a very active weather pattern for parts of the western U.S. Maybe a chance of some rain there in California. And there's Florence coming onshore. And then we get this very strong troughing there in Canada. This is kind of an unusual pattern. We also see the very strong northwesterly flow coming out of the Arctic area. If this was December, January, we would be looking at some very cold conditions in this part of the country, way up north and into Canada. That's some very strong troughing there in the Canadian prairies. So very strong cold air mass around the 15th or 16th in that region. As for the southern U.S., that subtropical high is going to be very close, so that'll be keeping skies kind of clear from the Four Corners area out towards the Panhandles. And then as we get a little bit later, 17th, 18th, 19th, looks like Florence heads out to sea. And then we see that zonal flow start coming back. Looks like the Hudson Bay vortex moves more into the Labrador Sea area, right in this region right here. So maybe that'll bring us a little bit of a pattern change later in September. The European model, let me show you that one. That's kind of considered to be the counterpart to the GFS. There it is right there, European model bringing Florence towards North Carolina. Very similar track, maybe a tiny bit south. So there's good agreement there between the models. And let's check out Olivia. There it is right there. It's very hard to find, but yeah, presumably it's a very similar track. So yeah, I think we're looking at trouble there for North Carolina. Let me show you one other aspect to the storm. Here's the GFS bringing the storm into North Carolina, and you notice that it slows down and kind of sits right along the coast there. This is the 14th, the morning of the 14th. It looks like it's making landfall around that time. The morning of the 15th, still in the same area, and the morning of the 16th, it's still there. And part of the reason is there's a lot of ridging in this area. It's kind of acting as a bit of a force field there and keeping the hurricane from making progress inland. The problem with this is these well-developed hurricanes tend to have incredible amounts of moisture, and I think if this really does pan out with a system coming on shore, installing like that, we're probably going to see some very, very serious flooding in parts of North Carolina. So this would be a storm that would affect not just the coastal areas, but areas very far inland. When you're talking 10 to 15 inches of rain, that can have all kinds of effects regardless of where you are there. So that'll be something we're going to have to watch. This is still several days out, so there is still, a little bit of a margin for error. It could go south, it could go north, but for now it looks like there's agreement coming into North Carolina. So that's what we're going to go with for the time being. All right. Anything else going on? Let's see. Yeah, this is another factor. The next outbreak of cold air coming in next weekend, driven by this 1030 millibar high. This is all big cold air mass coming in from the central Canadian area. That's going to be approaching that hurricane. So there's the leading edge of that front there on the 16th. And then we get up to the 17th. It's rapidly pushing southward. This is kind of a big wedge of cold air quickly moving southward. So it looks like that's going to be kind of a saving grace there if that system does park itself over Carolina. This should move it very quickly out to sea there. That's a lot of cold air coming in. And let's see, that's going to affect pretty much all of the eastern two-thirds of the U.S. around the middle of the month. So a lot of cold air coming in. And let's see what happens after that. Looks like that drives the hurricane back out to sea. And then looks like maybe a bit of a reinforcing shot coming in for the 19th and 20th. Okay, and yeah, it looks like a lot of that cold air is going out into the Gulf, so that could have an effect there on sea surface temperatures. Maybe that might put the brakes on hurricane season for the second half of September for a while. Okay, and I think that's about all we got for tonight. One last look at chat there. Yeah, Dwayne Ward mentioning 15 to 25 inches. And Michael O says looking like Harvey version 2 for the Carolinas. And yeah, that's another thing I wanted to mention. We're going to try to do a couple of specials through the week. I don't know which days we're going to be doing that, but I think at the very least on Tuesday. Well, Tuesday is usually when we're doing a webcast, but on Wednesday we'll do the webcast, and possibly tomorrow so we can keep tabs on the storm. So just check the live page and see if we have a stream scheduled, and if we do, it should be around the same time. And then when Florence makes landfall, we'll just do that whenever it happens, and we'll kind of cover things. Basically anything that's making landfall that's category 3 or above, we're definitely going to be covering that, so stay tuned. Okay, that's all I've got for tonight. Let me find my music. There it is. All right, y'all take care and have a good evening, and we will see you sometime in the next couple days. Bye-bye.